without further ado, let me just get started. So a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Karina Kwok, and I'm the Head of Professional Practices at the Institute for HR Professionals, IHRP for short. And we're very happy today to be collaborating with the Singapore University for Technology and Design, SUTD, to discuss this topic of what is the new normal after COVID-19. I think a lot more webinars, hopefully not glitches that we're experiencing now, but I think COVID-19, as it's disrupted our webinar here today, has really disrupted our way of life and forced us into a new virtual way of reality, workplace reality. So overnight, I've become an online shopper. We have become e-learners. We've become webinar facilitators. So it's not easy, but somehow we have managed and will manage. And COVID-19, interestingly, has actually catalyzed and accelerated digital adoption the way no CIO, CHRO, or CEO has. So this is going to be the new normal for us. As the popular saying goes, let's not waste a good crisis. So how can we study the lessons learned from COVID and apply this new lens to positively shape the future of work post-COVID? So I've got my esteemed guest speakers here. We've got Carmen, Dr. Nilanjan, and Dr. Jaclyn Lee, who will be sharing a little bit more. But before I turn it over to them, let me just do a very quick introduction for Dr. Jaclyn Lee. So Jaclyn has over 25 years of experience in HR across various industries, and she has a doctoral degree from the University of Twente in Netherlands. Before joining SUTD, she was the Senior Vice President of Group HR in global companies, such as General Motors, NEC Corporation, and she has managed HR and capability development for the Asia Pacific region. She currently sits on various boards and committees on both the public and social services sector, where she's been a member, where she volunteers her expertise. And actually, personally, for IHRP, she's been a tremendous help and contribution to us since our inception. She served on my professional practices committee for the past 4 years. She is a passionate educator and currently teaches HR analytics for the SUTD Academy, where she trains hundreds of HR professionals in analytics. So over to you, Jaclyn, to help us kick off the panel dialogue. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so sorry for the slight technical glitch just now, but we got it sorted out. It's kind of interesting topic about really what's the new normal of what's going to happen after COVID-19. So welcome to our seminar entitled, What's the New Normal? How do we manage after COVID-19? So I'm pleased, to be hosting this seminar together with my esteemed panelists. I'm looking forward to an extremely interesting exchange of ideas, and I hope that for those listening in that you will walk away with interesting concepts and ideas to implement in your workplace. Right. So, you guys know that COVID-19 has taken us by storm. The pandemic has actually caused major disruptions to economies, organizations, work life, as well as social life. As shared by John Norton in The Guardian, recent article in The Guardian, as the pandemic continues to turn the world upside down, new realizations are beginning to dawn on us that we are all online now, and we're all willing to use this for any part of our lives, Even my children, my adult kids are saying, hey, I miss my friends. Just the other day, my son was exercising with his friends through Zoom, so it's quite interesting. So now everything is virtual for the time being. So, John Norton says that really, you think about it, we are willing to use telecommuting for any part of our lives, provided we have the right experience and right model. So there's no going back to normalcy. So that train has actually left, and the virus is really not going away anytime soon. So if you think about it, another CNN report states that the new normal will be such that gathering in the thousands will not happen anytime soon. I miss all my concerts. There would be more spacing in restaurants, staggered hours, multiple shift patterns in the workplace to reduce the spread of this new infection stemming from the COVID-19. So you think about it, really the whole world, the model of work has changed. And whether we like it or not, we have to adapt. So other measures include really widespread temperature checks and continuous donning of masks. So businesses that rely on people coming together in large numbers, such as cafes, restaurants, malls, and even livelihoods will be impossible to manage, you think about it. And gig workers, from drivers to plumbers to freelance yoga instructors, they're going to see their jobs becoming more and more precarious. Right? As you think about it, uncertainty can certainly drive anxieties. And how do we manage, as managers and HR professionals, leaders, manage this type of massive changes and really help our employees, and our organizations adapt to the new normal? Okay, so Karina has introduced my two esteemed panelists, Carmen, who has many years in the industry as a seasoned HR professional, and Dr. Nilanjan Raghunath, who is one of my fellow colleagues, as an esteemed sociologist. She has managed, she studies and look at, work as well as the future of work and how it impacts and how technological disruption impacts society. So let me start the seminar by asking my two esteemed panelists the first question. So what do you think of the trends that John Norton has outlined in his article? The train has indeed left and the virus isn't going away. Maybe I could start with Carmen.
Yes, thank you, Jaclyn, and thank you, IHRP and SUTD, for inviting me to this opportunity to speak on this topic. John Norton mentioned a few trends in his article, and he talked about the fact that pandemics will come again sooner than expected because of the climate change. He also talked about the use of surveillance and technology in terms of how countries manage their population. And from my perspective, there's a recent Harvard study that pointed to the fact that the COVID-19 could re-emerge again as early as 2024. But from now until then, countries are struggling with trying to find the vaccine because the virus has multiplied into several strains. And even the use of antibodies are also not clear around how it could enable finding a vaccine. And so there's still a very, very murky environment that all stakeholders in the ecosystem will still have to navigate over the next 12 to 18 months. And so, I like the fact that he said, there's a hammer and a dance in this whole climate, that just as countries implement very stringent social distancing measures using legislation, companies and individuals need to know how to navigate in this very uncertain environment to keep the workforce sane and also to enable businesses to sustain itself. So this is not going to go away, and in fact, this is a very timely topic right now.
Nina, can I pass on to you for comments?
Thank you, Jaclyn, and thank you everyone for listening in. I'm very happy to be part of this, and of course a part of SUTD, which has been my home now for many years. Love the place. So firstly, I just want to start off with the fact that a lot of us, at this very strange moment, we've been separated from our families, right? So I'm here alone in Singapore and my family is spread globally. So I'm now really thinking, okay, I shouldn't have fought with them so much, You tend to think like, okay, you tend to build your relationships in times of crisis. And of course, I love my family very much, but I realized I cannot see them for months. But then I thought, okay, let me work backwards and really try and understand what the pandemic is all about. Because one of the issues we all face is that there's too much information out there, cross-cutting each other. So one of the first things I want to say is, please, let's all just look at reliable information, because there is just chaos out there in terms of what the pandemic does and doesn't do. And of course, different news channels such as Fox News, like talking about many things that, sometimes you don't know what is believable and what isn't. So I started looking a lot at the scientific reports and speaking to some scientists. And I realized one important thing: the pandemic is a very complex thing. It is not just a virus, okay? So it's an intersection between virus, public health, social responses, responses by the state, medical advances, treatment, etc. So we're not just looking at one thing. So that's why I think what the article says is, you know, it's true, like we just don't know. We can use the best data analytics that are out there, but we don't know when it's going to disappear. And I think that's very frightening because every day we look at the numbers and we see the numbers are going up, they're going up, they're going up, and we're like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? But I think there's a silver lining in all of this, especially for us, you know, those of us who live in Singapore. I think, you know, in some ways, I'd like to say, okay, look at the numbers, but don't get frightened by them because you are living in a very well-managed country that really knows how to take care of all of us. And I think I really want to stress that because a pandemic is really all about how it's going to be managed. So if the numbers scare you, just think positively and say, well, I'm actually in a country which is taking such good care of me. And also, because of this, lots of innovation is happening. You know, better face masks are coming out, better PPE is coming out. Hopefully there'll be a vaccine, but you know, that's going to go through certain trial and error. But I think what we need to focus on right now as Singaporeans is really how do we keep that societal cooperation going? How do we keep our families functioning, you know, through this crisis? And especially, I have a lot of compassion for you mothers who are both working and homeschooling your kids. You know, suddenly everybody's become a teacher and using the digital. So yes, I mean, I think good things will come out of this crisis, even though things are very murky right now.
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, a lot of disruptions. We see a lot of new trends. So if you think about in terms of, learning from this situation, if I think about, you know, Singapore, you know, I like to kind of like turn the question to you, Carmen. Do you think about as a seasoned HR professional, I believe you've been talking to colleagues, you know, people who have, have to manage major disruptions, you know, in the workplace. What are the lessons learned from this COVID situation in Singapore? How do you think this will change the way we manage people?
So I'd like to come from a few perspectives. First of all, in speaking with many business and HR professionals, we realized that the country has been woefully prepared to manage a remote workforce. I think we have been working and talking about flexible work-life balance, and even in recent years, well-being of employees, working from home for many years, and the government has given out many grants for many years, but the take-up rate has, not been as high as desired, right? So there's been, a lot of debate and discussion really around how effective is this work from home. So the number one topic has been managing a remote workforce, and yet expecting, some level of productivity as well for a workforce that you can't really see them. You can only see them virtually. You can't really touch and interact, right? Like a normal face-to-face interaction, and that's very important in an Asian business context. The second thing that we are also seeing is really the emergence of tech in terms of social media collaboration tools to connect and to do work together, digital tools that enable startups to continue to innovate across, virtual mediums, so that they continue to stay viable for their businesses. What's interesting also, the rise of social capital, where many people who have not been talking for a while, or perhaps not been interacting for a while, across different industries, right now they are coming together to collaborate. So I lead a task force with more than 20 sectors across Singapore, and you see the HR professionals gathering to discuss, debate, enable, and to support one another. So you are very heartened, or one is very heartened to actually see the agility and the collaboration that's happening across various industries, because people are coming together to solve problems, to be to do some good for the well-being of the employees and also the community. I would say a third thing really is around all the re-emergence of digital transformation, and how as a country the government has been pushing a lot of these, and many SMEs have been in different phases of adoption, etc. So this whole COVID has thrown up a lot of questions, because through the use or lack of digital tools, it throws up cultural issues around what constitutes care for your employees during this time. where they don't feel safe, and for those who have to be on the front line, how do you ensure their safety? So I think, it definitely poses many implications for the HR community and business around how they will engage with their employees, providing high care, high touch in a very uncertain environment, but yet calibrating the definition of what is productivity.
Interesting observation, interesting comments. Really, how do you kind of, adapt the models of tech as in pre and post COVID-19? So as I think about, society as a whole, Nina, I'm turning this question back to you, as a sociologist. How do you think Singapore, society will adapt after COVID-19? And will this have a permanent and lasting effect on societies?
I think that, if you look at Singapore's history, history always teaches us very important lessons. And we've been a very resilient and innovative society. Look how much we've grown in the last, 50 odd years, right? What have we become, right? From a small place. We're still small size-wise globally, but we've become a giant, right? So in other words, we've bet the odds, and we've become like an economic giant that is highly developed and, with a huge per capita income. So all these kinds of progresses are not something that we forget, right? So that means that we have the innovativeness and the resilience, I think, to go back to build a new normal, a new and a better normal, perhaps. So maybe something great will come out of this. But in order for that to work, I really want to talk about societal resilience. So let's think about the core values for what Singapore actually stands for, right? We stand for multiculturalism. We stand for meritocracy, amongst many things, right? And we also stand for respect for something like the rule of law. So these are very important factors, that have built and made Singapore very successful. And I believe that all the more after like an episode like this, we need to focus on those things, those building blocks, of our country, the hard work and all of that, and make sure that we have community resilience. Like, make sure you are respecting and validating your neighbors, your family, your friends, your co-workers. This is very important, especially during a time of crisis. You got to show people that, you're there for them. And, even if that's only digitally right now. And the other thing is, of course, respecting the rule of law. If the government tells us to wear a mask, please let's wear a mask, because the faster we do that, the faster we get back to work, right? So there are certain things. There's always this trade-off between, the economy and, of course, well-being, right? So the thing is, if we follow the set of rules, and possibly, the economy can even recover even faster. So I think there are challenges. Social distancing will be a challenge. I think it's something that might continue for a little while longer. Even after the circuit breaker ends, it might transform into more social distancing. But I think it is something that we can overcome. And this is where I feel, even SUTD's expertise in engineering and design, there could also be a lot of design factors that could be innovated to come into this. So I actually see a lot of improvisation and innovation coming out of this at the societal level, at a personal level, and and also in terms of how we collaborate with the state and with industry. So again, I want to stress this whole notion of validation. I believe that validation is the key to build not only our social resilience. Another point I want to touch on is psychological well-being. It's so important while, we are at home, we cannot do the things that we all Singaporeans, we love going to the hawker center, right? Going to our favorite stall. Now we cannot do that in terms of going and sitting there. Yes, we can still get takeout, but we are social people, Singaporeans. So, there are certain restrictions, but I think we will learn to cope with it, because once we emerge into, a healthier state, then we'll all be fine. So we'll be fine to go back to normal. So the new normal can become the old normal, provided we all put the parts in place. So I'm a big believer in collaboration. Yes.
Right. So in essence, Nina, what you're saying that things will definitely change. The societal norms will change, but with this change will come about new innovations and adaptation,
Yes.
so that societies will continue to evolve. Singaporeans will continue to become more innovative, and just find new ways of readapting our lifestyles even after this whole pandemic is over. So that's a really positive outlook. So as I think about organizations, let's back to the topic of companies and organizations. And I think about, around this new disruptions is happening, I'm sure it's thrown a lot of companies off the bus in terms of the way they coordinate the regions, the way they coordinate amongst employees that now you can't travel. I just talked to one of my friend who is selling banking solutions throughout Asia Pacific region. He says now he's selling software through Zoom, they're unheard of in the past. So turning to Carmen, how do you think organizations should harmonize and integrate their workforce across regions, as a result of this new normal?
I think there are a few imperatives that companies need to do. First of all, they need to have a really serious agenda or framework around ensuring well-being and health and safety of their employees. It is no longer something that's optional. It is no longer a luxury. In fact, it is an imperative because employees demand that, given that we are still trying to understand what this virus is and how it behaves and the implications for work life and social life and family life and our personal life. And so companies need to examine this topic of well-being and begin to put monies and investments and resources to really invest. I think for far too many years, some companies never quite look at well-being as a holistic care of the employees, social, emotional, mental, and also physical. But now the pandemic has brought to the fore, what is the company going to do for me around my own well-being? And so, this is a very important topic that has come to the fore of the HR agenda. The second area imperative is really recalibrating and looking at all the skill sets within the company itself. The backdrop being digital transformation and also job redesign, and the need to rethink, what exactly are the mission critical skills for your company in order to stay competitive and sustainable, because the next pandemic could come sooner than expected. What is the window of time for you to evaluate that, with the need to perhaps move more job roles towards automation, redesign other roles so that perhaps you don't need so much manpower spread across so much real estate in so many countries. So I do see the triplet, right, the job redesign, automation, and real estate coming as a very important question for companies to reevaluate and to recalibrate themselves, when the recovery starts. And I think the third area really is culture. What's really important for us, right? And the good and bad thing during this pandemic is you see all kinds of practices by different companies. You see those that are very high care, high touch, and high tech. You see those that are perhaps still struggling to learn the tech, and perhaps, they have started to cut their employees' pay and, put them on no pay leave and that kind of a thing. So you see a spectrum of HR practices. I'm hopeful that, out of this, right, companies will really have to evaluate. How do they build a culture that will help them to sustain? Because studies have shown there's a correlation between employee engagement and their ability to bounce back from crises such as this. So it is, incumbent upon companies, for good reasons, to ensure that they build a very committed workforce so that they can actually bounce back very quickly from a pandemic.
Yeah, those are really interesting observations. If you think about what is happening, organizations could take this as an opportunity to really differentiate themselves as really good employers with good practices. Just saw an interesting video by DBS Bank. Entire senior management team got together and sang a song, and it doesn't matter how good or bad the singing is, the camaraderie that comes with it. And the Singtel video, I thought was quite interesting. We discovered that our Eileen, who is the CHRO for Singtel, is terrific singer. We shall invite her to kind of guest star and as a soloist in future. Really interesting. So you think about these new norms and how good companies really differentiate themselves from companies that use these opportunities to, you know, take advantage of employees. I just had someone call me yesterday and say that a particular organization, I shall not name, has actually asked all their employees to go on unpaid leave, and yet telling them, although it's unpaid leave, you have to work from home. So it's pretty, abusive in that sense. So you see the good and the bad. So turning to really looking at, you know, how different societies in different countries, you know, adapt to changes. So to Nina, how do you think, you know, the societal norms in different countries are going to change after COVID-19?
I think firstly, I think the important part is countries are now start to rethink a lot of their national and global policies with regard to the environment, with regards to even, you know, standard norms of hygiene, you know, public hygiene. And also, I think the biggest issue will be infrastructure. Because one of the things that, you know, this pandemic actually brought about is, do we actually have the infrastructure to deal with all, you know, like thousands of people getting sick? I mean, and you can see that different countries across Europe and even, you know, the United States, which is, you know, supposedly is one of the richest and of course has amazing healthcare. I mean, you know, you just have to watch the news, right, to understand like what's actually happening there. So I think it's brought to light a lot of issues that it also shows that one person or one institution cannot solve this problem. So I think in a way it's going to have to force people to collaborate. And some might do it willingly, some might need a little bit of a push in order to say, okay, we really need to put our heads together, because if we're going to have a similar crisis in the future, could be a climate crisis or any other crisis, how are we going to handle this while making sure that our economy still runs, right? Because one of the problems of this is the economy, you know, taking a backseat when people are trying to solve the crisis. And we all know that the economy needs to run, right? Like, you know, how many people can bear like a stock market crash, right? It's very hard on many people because of job losses, etc. The other thing is, it's also about, you know, international trade deals that need to be looked at. So I think the pandemic has thrown out a lot of issues that the world really, really needs to urgently solve. Another important point is things like where people move and where work moves, right? So a lot of countries, you know, need to have talent. They need to have foreign talent. Plus, they also need to look at things like how much, you know, of a particular industry am I going to automate, right? Should I actually create robots in this area to do this and this job? Now, these are questions that policymakers often ask because they need to keep the jobs going. So things like migration also will be affected. I think across the board, many policies will change. So I think we need to be prepared for the big tide here globally. And I think as an individual, what I would do, I mean, for myself, is really to think about how prepared am I to actually ride the wave, right? What new training and skills can I get? What can I do? Because, you know, there is going to be change. So we just have to brace ourselves better for it.
Jack, you might want to.
Yeah. In essence, what Nina, you're saying is that, you know, although there are a lot of changes happening in societies, different countries have different styles of adaptation, different healthcare systems, but eventually it really comes back to the individual, how much we're willing to reskill, we do ourselves, and readapt to the new normal, what's going to happen after all this crisis is over, right? So as I think about moving on to the next topic, really around really managing, managers and HR, HR directors, managers, people leaders, really how, as you think about it, I want to ask you this question, Carmen. How do managers equip themselves with the new skills needed to manage the workforce? Really, after this is over, what do you see as the new normal managers will need to anticipate?
So just to answer your question in context, a lot of engagement studies, as recent as this year, has demonstrated that Asian managers, including the ones in Singapore, are not very effective in engaging their employees. Engagement scores in Singapore stood at 47% versus the global average of 53%. And so in the light of this, what used to be, I don't really have to spend time talking to my employee regularly. I don't really have to give feedback. I don't really have to invest, in HR because the products will sell by itself. Things will just, I don't really have to focus on my culture because, I think I can still attract talent. So all those questions have now come up in a very significant way around what are companies going to do to manage differently in the light of circuit measures that could be extended, or maybe even intermittent circuit breaker measures, even after this whole official end on the 1st of June, right? If there's a re-emergence of the virus. And so the number one thing that would really play very deeply into managers is, what is the need for a mindset shift? Because employees will be more vocal around their rights, around safety, well-being, care of the employee during such a time, and what is the company going to do about it? So of course it presents itself around this work from home issue, but really it's only the symptom. There are many underlying root causes and manifestations and implications. And so managers in Singapore have been for many years being very skeptical. And so the number one issue that they will have to confront with is what is going to take to shift that mindset, right, in a more accelerated phase. Because now they really have to drive employee engagement and productivity, okay? And so that's the first challenge. The second challenge is, how do you sustain the business? And in a situation where the markets are very uncertain, revenue is dropping, despite governments putting in injection of economic stimulus, as long as your customers are not spending the money to buy, then what are you going to do, right? How are you going to innovate more? How are you going to create differently? How are you going to pivot to another industry? And all these take that human connection, innovation, creativity to make happen. And so if your employees are still very preoccupied with the base level of engagement, then how are you going to mobilize your workforce to actually produce, right, the results or the productivity gains that you're trying to see in relation to your competitors? I mean, I know of companies right now that are looking at, if they are looking to hire or buy companies, they're looking at picking up organizations, right, and looking to hire leaders who are resilient and able to demonstrate that emotional, physical, mental toughness to lead. And so, if you don't quite, as a leader, fall into those categories, would you be I would say, be effective in your role as a manager going forward? So I think there's a lot of time right now to really calibrate this employer-employee relationship. And, let us take this opportunity to reset, require managers to do things differently, to take the risks, because presentism is not going to be the norm going forward for you to manage your workforce. I think managing a remote workforce has to be the new competency for any manager going forward right now, in order to bring out the best in their workforce. Otherwise, it will be a crisis that we are not, maximizing the benefit of learning.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you, Carmen. In one of my articles that which I talk about leadership, actually shared that actually a few key, ingredients of a good, successful leader is the ability to manage virtual teams. Bring virtual teams together across the regions to, harness that, innovation and bring together teams to deliver objectives, remotely. Of course, another objective, of a good leader is being able to use social media to engage. So now that the COVID-19 has happened, actually, I believe the acceleration will be faster. In the past, when there were resistance, now I see that with this kind of new models, the work is going to come around and force managers to really re-engage with the workforce in a completely different way. So interesting times ahead. So let me move on to Nina. Okay. So Nina, really, you do a lot of research in the area of technologies and societies. What types of new behaviors will you anticipate in view of the trends, new trends in telecommuting and working from home?
Sure. So I want to refer to two pieces of research that I've kind of recently published. And one is, of course, I'm referring to my book, where I talk about flux being the new normal, right? So expect change. I mean, change is the new normal. I mean, none of us can live in the world anymore where we don't see some kind of change. In fact, one of the top schools in the US, right, the dean actually told the graduating students, expect whatever you learn to be outdated and as soon as a couple of years. So I think things are going to be outdated. So no matter what. So I think what COVID-19 has done is just acted as a, like a catalyst for this very, very fast change. Now, what research shows is that every industrial revolution, we've had many now, right, throws in some kind of chaos into society. This is normal, right? So imagine when cars first came out, right? They took out the horse buggy and the car became the new normal. So like that, every age has something. But why we feel it so much more now is because things are much faster, like you said earlier, right? Things are happening at a very fast pace, but we also have the relevant technology to cope with all this flux. So I think in a way, technology is some kind of a boon, but it depends on how we use it. And we have to, of course, ethically use it and manage it. Now, the changes are going to be on many levels, socioeconomic, political, et cetera, et cetera. So in a way, we're working in two worlds. One world has borders and another world is the digital world, really has no borders. So we got to kind of work on how do we manage the two things. Then the other second piece of research I'm working on is how do we build our credibility capital. Now, a lot of us are visual, online all the time, right? Everything we do is online nowadays. And not even if you're not spending so much time online, everything that you do, somebody will have rated it or scored it. So in other words, we have to take care of our own credibility as well, right? Things like status, reputation, and trust. And these are things that everybody needs to manage, right? On their own, because I don't think any organization will manage that for you. It's something that you have to do for yourself as well. So in other words, build your own brand. But where I see challenges emerging is the gig economy and the sharing economy. Think about this. I mean, this is a question that I'm actually throwing out to everybody here. Is like, we all celebrated the sharing economy when it came up, right? Because suddenly you could access things cheaper. But now after COVID-19, do you want to share your ride with somebody? Do you actually want to borrow somebody else's handbag that they've used, right? So the question here is, are we now sort of moving from the sharing to say more of what we call an isolationist economy? Because, we're more at home, we're consuming at home, we're buying, from e-commerce. So these are questions, there are no complete answers yet, but I would definitely worry a little bit more about the gig kind of work, economists and sociologists, predicted some of this, and I have, worked on a lot of these ideas. But one of the things that they didn't completely think about was a global pandemic. When that kind of a negative disruption comes in, what happens? And Bill Gates did talk about that in one of his TED Talks a couple years ago. And now we have to factor in the idea that a disruption need not always be positive. A disruption could also be very heavy on us. So in other words, like I said, flux is the new normal. So we have to think about what kinds of business and other models will actually turn up in this new normal. And again, I just want to push this idea that innovation is the key. And I see a lot of it happening at SUTD, so that really excites me because people are really thinking on their toes, how do we solve problems? So I think we need to have that mode of, how can I be a problem solver? Now, everybody doesn't need to be like a top scientist to solve problems. It can start at a very micro level. It can start in your household, How do you do things newly, right? How do you do things in a way that can improvise and actually make things work better? So I think innovation is definitely the key. that's the key to the future.
Thank you, Nina. So basically, innovation and more innovation, and new behaviors in terms of telecommuting, working from home. In fact, we never thought we could work 100% from home. Although Zoom is effective, I would love to touch my fellow colleagues once in a while. But it's still, enabling me to get my job done on a daily basis. So these are some new norms, new behaviors that I think we have to kind of reorientate ourselves. And of course, there are industries where there's high touch, telecommuting might be a little bit more challenging. So my last question to both of you before we take questions, I think I see a lot of questions coming through the Q&A. We will address a couple of those questions. Now, my concluding question to both of you each is, when the circuit breaker ends, maybe can you share with me one or two practices you think that we can adopt as organizations evolve? Maybe I start with Carmen.
So first of all, since we're in Singapore, I would say that for companies that are struggling to use tech or had never invested in tech as a collaboration tool within the company or as a communications means, with your employees, I would say tap on the government grants that enable you to start your digitization journey, and also the work-life grants that will help you to put in place some telecommuting policies. I think, there's a lot of fun out there and support. And so, why are we still waiting for, right, to tap on those funds? So I think that's a very important consideration, since countries and perhaps companies are struggling with cash flow and revenue, and so spending more investments is quite a challenge. The second area that I would see is really the emergence of the HR agenda around the rise of female leadership. I think we've seen a lot of female leaders across the world right now lead differently from the men, and therefore there's a lot of debate around, is it a female thing or is it a male thing? Or is it, something else, right, within the leadership DNA of the person? And I think for many years, we've been talking a lot about D&I, and in a pandemic and even in a post-pandemic, I think generally what employees are telling us is they appreciate a very high empathy, high care, high touch, and notwithstanding a high-tech environment. And so if companies get those ingredients right, when the time the next pandemic comes, they will be much more prepared. And so I see a lot of opportunities for female leaders right now within companies. They, are stepping up. They're demonstrating very high empathy in how they manage their teams through calls, getting together just to talk, right, not about work, but really to engage all the virtual coffees that's going on, because people want to be connected emotionally as well. So I think for any company that's able to help their leaders connect emotionally with their employees and not just through the head, right? I think, that will stand them in a better state in terms of their recovery.
Excellent. Nina?
Yes, so one of the things, it links back partly to the previous question as well. In terms of telecommuting, remote work, etc., I think it's going to be a good opportunity for companies, even universities or any employer, to really think what aspects of work life can be digitized at this given point in time, and what aspects need a lot more work. So I think it's a good way of trying to understand which models work and which models don't actually work. And then secondly, I think, again, to building on Carmen's point, is this idea that we all need to learn how to de-stress. And this is particularly true in terms of family life and work-life balance, and within the workplace, etc. Build stronger bonds, build a lot more networks. As we all know, social networks are very, very important. So, and besides that, it's our psychological resilience as well. So I think a lot has to be done at the community level as well, in terms of people actually being bold enough to say, okay, fine, I've been through stress, now let me actually go and seek the kind of help that I need. And in a sense, I think we need to destigmatize, if anything, people actually going in for counseling, because a lot of people are still very shy. They don't want to get labeled as having seen a counselor or gone to, even their manager or somebody for help. So in a sense, I think we as a community and society have to be more open about seeking help, at the right time, at the right place, so that we can actually go on with our lives. And of course, I've already talked about, how important it is to upgrade our skills and keep up with the evolving standards of digitization. And also, and very importantly, I think this pandemic at least has taught me, and maybe many, many people out there, about what it means to have work-life balance and spending quality time, with your family. And also, funny enough, we are actually spending a lot more time on the computer right now with all these Zoom meetings and everything. But at the same time, it might help some people get off their devices. So it might actually help people eventually think about device addiction, because there are so many families that complain that, like even while they're eating together, people are, on their devices. They don't even look at each other and they're just like eating and stuff. This might actually force us to spend quality time together, because by the end of this, we might say, okay, I'm just so sick of being, constantly online. I actually need to go and do some real face-to-face stuff, because as we all know, face-to-face interaction is hugely important. Then lastly, of course, more stringent hygiene standards. I think everybody now is aware about how that is important, right? Simple thing like washing your hands. I mean, of course, I always wash my hands, but I never realized how important it is, till now, till everybody keeps reminding us, wash your hands, make sure that your environment is clean, etc. So I think it's multiple things coming together. But I feel in Singapore, I mean, if any country can do this, I think we can do this.
Okay, excellent. I think we've had a really, really engaging and interesting conversation. I would like to just add on 1 or 2 points on my own. I've always been such an advocate of digitization, and now it's even more urgent. Been talking for the last couple of years about the need to really digitize, the need to use technology to make our work easier. And now with this COVID-19 situation, you can see the urgency. So I would like to just kind of share a little bit about, maybe just 20 seconds to talk a little bit about, not sure whether you can see this.
Not really, yeah.
Okay, it doesn't matter.
No.
Yeah.
I've written a book called Accelerating Organization Culture Change. And really in this book, I spent quite a bit of time writing this because I felt such an urgency that while culture change is happening, it's too slow. And companies are not moving fast enough to really be able to catch the changes, the rapid changes in technology. And the reason is because there's so much resistance to change, and culture is so pertinent. So in this book, I really talk about how we can use digital tools to really transform and accelerate change. So if you're interested, it's being sold on Amazon bookstore, and I'm happy to give free copies. After this, you'll be right to me on my LinkedIn account. Okay, so right now I'm going to pass, kind of take a look at some of the Q&A, and perhaps I would ask my colleagues to pull out the questions for us. Okay. So what is the panel's view on the effectiveness of the new normal in terms of telecommuting policies, learning and development? So perhaps I could get Carmen to tackle question 1 and Nina question 2. In view of the rapid number of questions that's coming, maybe we limit our answers to about 60 seconds for each, 60 to 90 seconds for each of the questions. So you want to take the one on telecommuting, Carmen? Okay.
All right. So the number 1 question really is about telecommuting and working from home. I would say that, a couple of best practices. First of all, you have to start a journey to do change management, all right? Mindsets, communication, with your managers, so that you answer, some of their concerns and put them into FAQs and help them to address, their concerns around trust and, the skepticism or the resistance thereof because of telecommuting and they don't see their employees. Second thing, the company needs to really redefine what's peak performance, because when you work from home, companies really care about, productivity and how they want to bring out the best. And so the manager and the employee has to have that conversation around, what defines, right, the results to be established and achieved, and how do they go about doing that. The key thing is not for the managers to micromanage the employee, but really to understand, have a mutual understanding and respect, and be open communication around how they're going to manage a telecommuting virtual relationship. A third thing I would say is, the importance of support to the employees. So companies need to enable employees to say, what would be a structure and a routine that you need to establish, including maybe some form of decent physical space, at home or something, where employees can be doing some work uninterrupted. I think the key thing I want to emphasize is this: whether you put in place telecommuting or not, the key thing is really the fundamental trust. Trust is the new currency in the new digital economy. And this pandemic has accelerated this topic of trust in no other way than, telecommuting and working from home and managing a remote workforce. So even if you don't have the right tools, I think if there's trust between the employer and the employee, work can still get done. But if for some reason you're using tech as a reason, then I would say, it becomes a cultural issue that really needs to be tackled.
Excellent. Nina?
Okay, I'll go to the learning and development question. So obviously, I think learning and development is, very heavily impacted, and I think this is an excellent question. And different organizations will handle this differently, primarily because, it's different industry-wise, first of all. And secondly, I think different organizations have different kinds of budgets, I would assume, on how to handle this. But I think definitely as a sociologist of work, what I can only stress is really to say how important learning and development is, particularly in the time of a crisis, or even when there is no crisis. Primarily because, so many different standards and technologies are changing within industry. So I think organizations have to spend whatever resources that they can, and, make sure that they're using the various available resources that the government has been very generous with in terms of reskilling employees, or people to also just use their skills future credits and things like that. Just upgrade yourself, within your industry, because it's not just the pandemic, but rather so many skills will be outdated. I know that as a sociologist doing research in this area, that skills are disappearing fast. So, we all need to do that catch-up race as quickly as possible. So if your employer doesn't do it, make sure you do it, I think, right? That's what I can say.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll take another question. Now, during this COVID-19 period, what are the common HR best practices? And how does HR ensure that employees are able to keep up at home, having to juggle both work and family? Interesting questions. Perhaps maybe, Carmen, since they are both HR questions, I will take one and you take two. How about that?
Okay.
So in terms of what are the common HR practice during this this COVID-19 period, I would say that, like, for us at SUTD, we do a lot of things like care packs, getting the CEO to write out care messages, because I think it's a time where everyone is nervous. It's on top of being disrupted at work. At home, we also worry about our loved ones having maybe catching COVID-19. So I think for companies to have good practices, I think DBS Bank, Singtel, they've done quite interesting things, like senior management rallying together to sing a song. Like for us, we got hand sanitizers, we got an apple and a hand sanitizer. Of course, you don't eat it together. One is for the hand, one is for eating, but we call it a care pack. We also, in the midst of preparing a welcome back gift for employees going back to work, you call it a return back to work gift, and getting our president to constantly write messages telling everybody, hey, look, hang in there. So it's really not about work. The messages are really about well-being, us being there for you. And I found the Zoom, like every day connecting on Zoom, is quite interesting. Like with my team, I know that it's difficult because I don't see them. So I said, okay, every Monday morning we have a check-in period. Okay, everyone just give a 10-minute update on what you plan to do for the week. So that kind of brings the team together. And on Friday afternoons, we'll say, hey, look, let's wind down. So last Friday, with the entire team played Pictionary and had charades. So it's really fun. So it's kind of a de-stress for the week. And so I kind of use some of these interesting methods to just build the team, bring people together. So I hope some of these examples you could pick from. Perhaps, Carmen, you want to ensure about the how employees are keeping out at home and juggling work and family?
Yeah, I think it's a very trying time right now for parents and having home-based learning as well to supervise the kids. I think HR can support by providing a few guidelines. So for example, try not to have calls during lunchtime or even pre-dinner, right? Pre-dinner requires preparation, right? So try not to have calls after 5:30 or 6 o'clock because you got to get, you know, the family organized around the meal preparation or even to order meals. I mean, but not everybody order meals every day. So there's some form of cooking and supervision, as well. I would say that because the children are going through home-based learning right now, it will be helpful for HR, right? Even if you are single, to understand that, you know, some of the children, they need to get onto the lessons and some of them might need to, you know, in the mornings when they start school, they need some tech support from their parents. So don't, you know, be insensitive. I think, you know, try to encourage your managers to recalibrate, right? I mean, what is the call, you know, first call in the morning? Is it 8 o'clock? Is it 9 o'clock? You know, let them settle their children first. So if you can, right, try to keep some of the Zooms and the webinars to maybe in the afternoon so that you also have time for, you know, the employee to really sort their family matters in the morning, have some quiet space where they can also work, right, without interruption. It's just not sustainable. I mean, if you have 10 Zoom calls in a day from morning until night, I think, you know, sometimes in a lot of, you know, Asian societies or maybe in some, for some individuals, saying no is a very hard thing. I think right now everybody's learning how to redraw their boundaries around Zoom and all that. So I think, you know, helping managers to respect certain boundaries of employees, recalibrating what is considered productivity during this time, and also introducing more flexibility around communication and how we all work this out, right? Because everybody is learning is extremely important. So taking a more understanding posture, taking a more supportive posture is really important right now for employers, towards their employees who have to juggle a lot at home.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I do is with my Zoom calls is I get my employees to bring their children to the camera and just they sit on the laps. It's quite interesting. We see the family in a different environment. Yeah. Okay, maybe we take another, I'm conscious of the time. We'll try and wrap up by 4. Maybe we take on another 2 or 3 questions and then we will have to wrap up. Okay. The next question. With the government's wage support and levy rebate, should we pay the government subsidy back to the employees? Wow. It is clear-cut for locals with the 75% scheme, but for foreigners, how should we go about it? And second question, remote work has been practiced successfully. What do you think our companies have been slow on the uptake? Maybe I get Carmen to answer question 4 and Nina question 5.
Okay.
The quick one? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the government was very clear that when they initiated the jobs support scheme, is to help the companies to stay afloat and they do not, retrench employees at the drop of a hat, right? So as we go through this circuit breaker and try to sustain all our different companies, it is important for companies not to take advantage of the situation and to start to cut their employees. So it really goes against the spirit of it. And MOM has been very clear that if you are found to be, cutting employees unnecessarily, you don't have good justification, they will come down quite hard on you and they will even, restrict some of your work pass applications. And so, net, it will not go down well on you as an employer. Okay. So companies need to bear that in mind. And, I'm hopeful that the HR community would really have to, I would say, send a very strong message together with, their cohorts, right, on an industry basis or on a company basis to say, hey, we do not want to appear in the newspaper for the wrong reasons. And the spirit of it needs to be calibrated in the midst of, this very challenging economic situation for businesses. And obviously for employees, if they if they're funded for 75%, then the funding will really go a long way to help, because the companies only have to fund 25%. In the case of foreigners, MOM has also given guidelines around how to deal with the cutting of pay or not, and they have obviously been given a lot of levies. They've been given a lot of rebates as well. And so even for the foreigner right now, you can actually see MOM is coming out to ensure that companies do not take advantage of the situation. So I would say go back to the advisories, make sure that your company is complying with those advisories, making sure that how you come across during this time and out of the COVID is extremely important for yourself as a viable employer going forward.
Excellent advice. Nina?
Okay, so I'm going to go to the second question about remote work. So to answer this question, why it's been practiced successfully by some tech companies, but some companies, have also been slow on the uptake. There are two reasons for this. Firstly, there is the infrastructure and the investment part, in terms of creating remote work, right? So some companies have been slower to do that, because they're just wondering about, how much money is going to take and are the rewards just going to reap the investments. Secondly, it's also about culture. Now, oftentimes, I visit companies, so sometimes I give talks on things like social networking for employees, etc. And this made me realize something very important, that depending on where the company originates from, right, they have a certain culture. For example, French companies work very differently, say, from German companies to British companies to American companies. So it really depends on how the employees are made to interact with each other, how they're made to conduct business, and also how the bosses and the employees interact with each other. Is it like a hierarchical structure? Is it more of a flat structure, et cetera, et cetera? So as a result of which, there have been a lot of differences in terms of how companies, do remote work. And there have been cases of some CEOs, in recent history, whereby some of them actually ordered their employees to come back to physical working spaces because they found like some of their employees were just slacking off. So there could be like a varied number of reasons as to why but this is happening. But I think with something like a pandemic like this with COVID-19, I think a lot of companies will have to really rethink, how are they going to do remote work and what aspects of the organization can actually go remote, probably even for a longer term, and what aspects, actually need sort of more sort of physical face-to-face interaction, and how those two interact with each other.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Nina. There's of course a lot of this consideration, but I think with what has happened is really forced companies to right now go into remote work, whether you like it or not. These 2 months of circuit breaker is actually a good testing ground. So after this, yes, I believe more companies will be more willing, and that could really change the way we work. What Carmen has shared in terms of real estate. In fact, when I look out on my house, the highway, I'm surprised no cars on ECP, which is a rare occasion. So you can see that even the the environment is getting better. So I'm just going to take last two questions and then we'll close the webinar in view of time. Are there any tips for HR practitioners on how to work closely with the authority, especially for SMEs? Usually HR team is lean, and how do we protect the company employee interests while ensure full compliance? This is a really good question for SMEs. And Carmen, would you like to take this question?
Okay. So there are a few organizations that you can basically tap, advice from SHRI to IHRP, to your industry association, where, sometimes I'm sure you are also in some form of a HR industry grouping, and also from, very experienced HR professionals out there that can help you to, ring fence, as it were, right? Whatever advice and whatever practices that you can actually learn from. And so trying to get into, I think, a group, a grouping or a group chat right now would be really useful. For example, in IHRP, we have a chat group of about 150 senior professionals who are certified, and every day they are sharing chats on how to basically implement the operational details and the advisories, so that it makes sense for them. Everything from their foreign worker issue, the Malaysians coming back and going there, employees who are stuck overseas, salary cuts, etc., etc. So I think that really is some form of support, so that you basically learn very quickly what companies are doing out there. Second thing, it provides momentum for you to bring it back to your leadership. So you are not bringing back your own voice, you are bringing back the voices of many companies, and no one wants to be seen perhaps to be violating the law or doing anything that's not socially acceptable. So I encourage you to do that, so that you can continue to learn and calibrate your responses. At the same time, it's a great time for you as an HR professional to really bring up, what kind of company do we want to be? How do we protect our company brand as we come out of this? And what sort of, basic dignity and protection that we need to provide for our employees, so that we protect our employer brand. And in fact, we can promote our employer brand more aggressively after the pandemic. I mean, these are questions that, as an HR professional, I encourage you to have the courage to bring up and to discuss and to debate with your leadership. I mean, whether or not they listen to you, at least you tried. And after the pandemic, you can decide if you want to stay with this company or not, if they're not seen to be supporting, right, your employees. So have the courage, go forth and do it. Yeah.
I think for a lot of SMEs, it's really a lot of bread and butter issues.
Yeah.
I've interfaced with a lot of HR, managers from SMEs, and they usually find that it's always a very delicate balance. So now that the government is coming in to fund 75% of the wages, for Singaporeans, it's really a good thing, like Carmen said, for all of you, to have the courage to be able to go to your boss and recommend solutions. So your bosses might have a different way of thinking, but if you might want to come up with a win-win, because they want to protect cash flow, protect the company. So you want to come up with a win-win, and nothing too costly, but simple ideas like some of the ideas don't cost a lot of money, but you want to get your CEO or your head of the company to come up with gestures that can really bring a lot of goodwill, bring the kind of goodwill with your employees during this period of time. So I'll take the last question, where perhaps Nina can help to answer. What kind of support can employers provide for workers who are working parents when working from home?
I think this one is, of course, I think this is not something I feel, employers can do much. I feel this is more something that, people have to sort of make sure that, they're having like an effective schedule at home, whereby, things are running well. Because one of the things that I recently read a Harvard Business Review article, like how working from home was actually quite complicated because people couldn't draw the boundaries between, fun time, play time, and work time, right? So a lot of these are personal practices, what we can do. But I think what employers can do is really provide sort of the understanding and the support and the flexibility. I think that's where employers can actually come in, is to make sure that, the bosses actually, really support their employees, the different working schedules, etc. But a lot of this is how organized we are. At least that's what the HBS article said, as people, and how do we draw boundaries, within the household. So I guess it is really like both need to kind of work in tandem. While the employers provide you with the support, with some of the infrastructure for you to bring home, etc. At the same time, you have to sort it out yourself, pretty much.
Thank you. So it's been such an interesting session. I've really enjoyed facilitating this, session about really what's the new normal. Really, none of us have all the answers. We can only anticipate. I'll be interested to find out some of the new norms that are going to happen. That are going to happen after this. So before we end the session, I think for myself, Carmen, we have LinkedIn accounts. I believe, Nina, you should have one. And please connect with us on LinkedIn.
Yes.
We're happy to address any questions. But please share your feedback with us on the QR code that is on the platform. Scan it in and give us your feedback. And on behalf of IHRP, SUTD, thank you for listening in. I apologize again for the slight technical, confusion at the beginning, but we managed to sort it out and still have a fruitful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jaclyn. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nila. Thank you, Jack. Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Karina. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Karen, bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.